Blood. That was the first thing Emily saw when she opened her door that stormy night. It wasn't a little streak or a few drops. It was a dark pool spreading across her front steps, mixing with the rainwater running down the cracked concrete. The lightning flashed, and for a second she saw him. A man sprawled on her porch, soaked, pale, and barely breathing. Her breath caught in her throat, her body frozen between fear and disbelief. She had no idea who he was, but one thing was clear. He was dying. Her first instinct was to slam the door and call the police. That's what anyone would have done, but something about the way he looked at her stopped her. His eyes, cold, sharp, desperate, met hers for a brief second. They weren't the eyes of a common criminal. They were the eyes of a man who had seen too much, who had lived through fire and was now on the edge of it again. "Please," he rasped, his voice cracked and faint. "No hospitals." Emily's mind raced. No hospitals? That didn't make sense. Who refuses help when they're bleeding to death? But there was no time to question. Her 8-year-old son Noah peeked from behind the kitchen wall, his small face pale. "Mom, what's happening?" She didn't answer him. She grabbed a towel, rushed to the man, and pressed it against his chest. Her fingers came away slick with warm blood. He was heavy, much heavier than she expected, but she dragged him inside anyway, leaving a trail of crimson on her wooden floor. The storm outside howled as she closed the door behind them. Her heart thundered in her ears. She had no medical training, only what she'd learned from taking care of Noah's scrapes and bruises. But something deep inside her refused to let this man die. Maybe it was her instinct as a mother, or maybe it was the faint human need to do the right thing even when it didn't make sense. She tore open her old first aid kit, the one she kept in the kitchen drawer. It was small, barely stocked, but it would have to do. She grabbed the bottle of rubbing alcohol, a roll of gauze, a sewing needle, and some thread. Her hands shook as she worked, cutting open his shirt to find the wound. The bullet hole was deep, just below his ribs. He'd lost a lot of blood, but his pulse, faint as it was, still beat under her trembling fingers. The man groaned in pain, his hand reaching for hers as if to stop her. Don't touch it," he muttered through clenched teeth. Emily ignored him. "If I don't, you'll die," she said, her voice firmer than she felt. She poured alcohol onto the wound, and he flinched violently, biting down on a rag she shoved between his teeth. She cleaned it as best she could, whispering half prayers under her breath. Hours passed like a blur. The storm outside raged on, lightning flashing through the curtains as Emily stitched his wound, her fingers raw and trembling. Noah sat in the corner, clutching his stuffed bear, watching his mother fight to save a stranger's life. Every time the man's breathing hitched, Emily's heart sank. But she refused to stop. Her kitchen looked like a scene from a nightmare. Bloodied towels, water from the rain she'd tracked in, and the metallic smell of iron hanging heavy in the air. Finally, sometime before dawn, the man's breathing evened out. His chest rose and fell slowly, weakly but steadily. Emily sat back on the floor, her body shaking from exhaustion. She stared at the stranger lying unconscious on her couch, wrapped in a blanket, the color slowly returning to his face. "Who are you?" she whispered to no one in particular. When the sun began to rise, painting the room in dull orange light, Emily made coffee with trembling hands. She hadn't slept all night. Her body ached, her mind whirled, and her floor looked like a crime scene. She sat across from him, watching his face. His jawline was sharp, his hair dark and matted with rain and sweat. Even in his broken state, there was something powerful about him, something dangerous. He woke around mid-morning. His voice was low, gravelly. "You saved me." Emily froze. She turned toward him slowly, not sure what to say. "I couldn't just let someone die on my doorstep," she said quietly. He gave a dry, bitter chuckle. "You shouldn't have." "Not me." His gaze fixed on her, piercing. "You don't know who I am." She shrugged, exhaustion dulling her fear. "You're someone who needed help. That's all I need to know." He looked at her for a long time, his eyes narrowing slightly like he was trying to understand her. Then he nodded slowly. "Call me Marco," he said finally. She knew that wasn't his real name. It sounded like the kind of name someone used when they wanted to hide, but she didn't push it. The rain stopped by noon. The neighborhood returned to its quiet routine, neighbors walking dogs, kids riding bikes. But Emily couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. She cleaned the blood from the floor, scrubbed her hands until they were raw, and tried to convince herself it was over. But every few minutes she'd glance toward the couch, where Marco lay half asleep, and feel the same cold prickle of unease. Around dusk, Noah tugged on her sleeve. "Mom, are we gonna be okay?" he asked softly. She smiled, brushing a hand over his hair. "We'll be fine, sweetheart. I promise." But even as she said it, she wasn't sure. That night, while she washed the blood-stained towels, she heard it, a faint rumble of engines outside. She peeked through the blinds. 2 black cars passed slowly down her quiet street. The same cars came back again a few minutes later, this time stopping at the corner. Her stomach tightened. She turned toward the couch, but Marco was already awake, his expression cold and unreadable. "Don't open the door," he said quietly. Emily stared at him, fear creeping into her bones. "Who are they?" she asked. He looked at her, his eyes dark and distant. "People who want to make sure I'm dead." And that was when she realized whatever she had gotten herself into tonight, it was far from over. The man she had saved wasn't just a stranger. He was someone powerful, dangerous, and hunted. And now, by saving him, she had just stepped into his world. The night dragged on like a slow, heavy nightmare. Emily barely closed her eyes. Every sound outside, the wind, the hum of a passing car, made her heart jolt. The stranger, Marco, lay on her couch, breathing shallowly under the old wool blanket she'd found in the closet. She had cleaned his wound again at dawn, whispering quietly to herself to stay calm, to keep steady hands. She didn't know what kind of man he was, only that someone had tried to kill him, and that someone might come back to finish the job. When sunlight finally broke through the clouds, it didn't bring peace. It only revealed the mess she'd created. Dried blood stained her floor, her towels were ruined, and her entire kitchen smelled like antiseptic and fear. She sat at the table, staring at the stranger's face. His expression was unreadable even in sleep. Sharp jawline, small scar near his eyebrow, a body built like someone who'd lived a violent life. She wanted him gone, wanted her quiet world back, but the thought of turning him out in his condition made her feel like a monster. Around mid-morning, he stirred. Emily tensed immediately, clutching her coffee mug as his eyes fluttered open. His gaze was hard, distant, the look of a man who'd spent his life calculating risk. "You're still here," he said quietly. "Of course I'm still here," she replied. "You're bleeding on my couch." He gave a faint smirk that didn't reach his eyes. "You could have called the cops." "Why didn't you?" She hesitated before answering. "Because I didn't think you'd survive the wait." Marco's eyes softened just a little, but then he leaned forward and winced, pressing a hand against his side. "You shouldn't have done it," he murmured. "You don't know who I am," Emily sighed. "You said that last night." "I don't care. I did what anyone should have done." He looked at her like she'd spoken another language. "No," he said firmly. "Not everyone would have done that. Especially not for me." She wanted to ask what he meant, but his tone stopped her. He didn't owe her an explanation. She stood up and started tidying the table, trying to act normal. "You need food," she said, her voice gentle but practical. "Soup, maybe. Something light." He didn't argue. When she brought him a bowl, his hands trembled slightly as he took it. He ate slowly, almost cautiously, as if unused to being taken care of. Noah watched from the hallway, clutching his toy car. "Is he bad, Mom?" he asked softly when Marco wasn't looking. Emily froze. She didn't know how to answer. "He's hurt," she whispered. "That's all we need to know." Hours passed in uneasy silence. Marco drifted in and out of sleep, and Emily kept herself busy cleaning and scrubbing every trace of blood she could find. Each stain reminded her of what she'd done, and what might come next. She thought about calling her friend Claire, but how could she explain? "Hey, I stitched up a bleeding stranger who told me not to call 911. It sounded insane. By evening, Marco was sitting upright, watching the fading light through the blinds. He looked calmer, though still pale. "You live alone?" he asked suddenly. Emily nodded. "Just me and my son." His gaze flicked briefly toward Noah's room, then back to her. "That's dangerous," she frowned. "It's not dangerous unless someone brings trouble here." He looked at her for a long moment, and something like guilt flickered in his expression. "Then I've already done that," he said quietly. Before she could respond, headlights swept across the window. Emily froze. Marco tensed immediately. Two cars, sleek, black, expensive, rolled slowly down the street. The same ones from last night. She peeked through the curtain, her breath catching in her chest. The cars didn't stop, but their presence felt deliberate, watchful. When she turned back, Marco was on his feet despite the pain. "Don't let anyone in," he said in a low voice. "If they knock, if they call, ignore it." "Who are they?" she asked. His answer was quiet, heavy. "People who think I'm dead. People who want to make sure I stay that way." She wanted to believe this was some misunderstanding, that maybe he was exaggerating, but deep down, she knew he wasn't. His tone carried the weight of someone used to danger, someone who'd seen death more times than he cared to admit. Are you in trouble with the police?" she asked cautiously. He gave a faint, humorless laugh. "The police wouldn't dare trouble me." That answer chilled her more than anything else. She turned away, pacing, trying to keep her voice steady. "You can't stay here. I have a child." He didn't argue. "I'll leave by morning," he said simply. "I just need a few hours." There was no arrogance in his tone, only exhaustion. Emily wanted to believe him, but something told her it wasn't going to be that simple. Later that night, as Noah slept and the house fell quiet again, Marco spoke from the couch. "Why did you really help me?" he asked softly. Emily hesitated, standing near the sink. "Because I couldn't let someone die on my doorstep. I've lost enough already." He watched her carefully. "Your husband?" She nodded once, swallowing hard. "Car accident. 3 years ago. Since then, it's just been us." Marco said nothing, but there was a strange look in his eyes. Respect, maybe even understanding. "Then you're stronger than you think," he said finally. "You did what most people wouldn't." She didn't reply, but part of her wanted to know why his words felt both comforting and dangerous at the same time. When dawn arrived again, the world felt different. Marco stood near the door, dressed in his blood-stained shirt, steady enough to walk. "You'll be safe," he said, his tone serious. "You have my word." She frowned, confused. "Safe from what?" But he didn't answer. He stepped outside, limping toward the street where two men waited beside a black car that seemed to appear out of nowhere. As he reached the car, one of them handed him a phone. He said a few words, then looked back at her house, eyes lingering. She couldn't hear what he said, but the expression on his face told her something had changed. When he got in the car and it disappeared around the corner, she exhaled, shaking with relief. It was over, or so she thought. But that evening, as the sun dipped low and the air turned quiet, the rumble of engines filled the street again. Emily stepped outside, her heart thudding. The same black cars lined both sides of the road, and this time they stopped. Men in dark suits stepped out, dozens of them, then more. 200 by the time it was done, standing silent, heads bowed toward her little house. She didn't understand what was happening until a familiar figure stepped out of the front car. Marco, clean, composed, and alive. He walked slowly toward her gate, and in that moment Emily realized the truth. The man she'd saved wasn't just anyone. He was someone powerful, someone whose word carried an army. And now, for reasons she didn't yet understand, that power was standing outside her door. The sound of engines filled the quiet suburban street, a low, thunderous hum that grew until it seemed to shake the ground. Emily stood frozen on her porch, her heart pounding so hard she could barely breathe. Noah clung to her leg, his small hand gripping tightly as the line of black cars came to a stop in front of their little house. Every door opened at once. Men in black suits stepped out in synchronized precision, their movements deliberate, disciplined, and silent. They didn't speak, didn't look around. They just stood there row after row like shadows taking human form. 200 of them. Emily couldn't process what she was seeing. Her neighborhood, a place where children rode bikes and neighbors waved from porches, was now filled with men who looked like they belonged in a different world entirely. Each of them bowed their heads slightly in unison, the air thick with tension. She felt dizzy, clutching the doorframe for balance. Her first thought was that something terrible was about to happen. Her second thought was of Marco. Then she saw him. The car in the center of the line had its door opened by one of the suited men, and Marco stepped out. He was dressed in a dark tailored suit, his hair slicked back, his face calm but unreadable. The man who had nearly died on her couch just a day ago now looked like someone out of a movie. Powerful, commanding, untouchable. Emily's breath caught. He moved slowly, his limp faint but noticeable, each step measured as he approached her gate. Neighbors peeked from behind curtains, whispering in shock. Some recorded with their phones, too afraid to come outside. The entire street was silent except for the sound of Marco's footsteps on the pavement. He stopped at the bottom of her porch steps and looked up at her. "Emily," he said softly, his voice carrying more authority than she'd ever heard from anyone before. "You saved my life. My men bow to you as they bow to me." The words hit her like a thunderclap. "What?" she managed to whisper, her throat dry. Marco glanced back at the sea of men behind him. "They are here to show respect," he said. "You did something no one has ever dared. You helped me when others would have walked away." Noah peeked from behind her leg, his wide eyes darting between the men and Marco. "Mom, are we in trouble?" he asked, voice trembling. Emily bent down slightly, her voice soft. "No, honey, it's okay." Though in truth she didn't know if it was. Marco took another step closer. He removed his gloves, holding them loosely in one hand. "You didn't just save a man," he said, his tone calm but carrying the weight of command. "You saved the head of a family. My family." Emily stared at him, her mind struggling to catch up. You're a Mafia boss?" she asked quietly. He didn't flinch, didn't deny it. "Yes," she took a shaky step back. "You shouldn't be here." "My son," but he interrupted gently, his voice lowering. "No harm will ever come to you or your child. From this day forward, you are under my protection. Anyone who dares to threaten you will answer to me." He turned slightly toward his men and lifted his hand. Instantly they bowed lower, a collective gesture that made Emily's stomach twist in disbelief. It was as if the entire street was kneeling to her. Her neighbors were still watching from their windows. She could feel their fear and confusion pressing against her like heat. The man who had bled on her couch was now commanding an army outside her home, and all of them treated her as someone sacred. "Marco," she said carefully, her voice shaking, "I don't want this. I don't want people bowing to me. I just did what anyone would have done." He looked at her, and there was something almost tender in his eyes. "No," he said simply. "Anyone else would have left me to die. You didn't." For a long moment they just stared at each other. Emily could hear the faint clicking of cameras from nearby houses, the wind rustling the leaves, the distant sound of sirens somewhere far away. Marco turned to his men again. "This woman," he said loudly, his voice carrying through the street, showed loyalty, compassion, and courage. From this day forward, she and her child are family. A low murmur rippled through the men like an oath being silently repeated. Emily's knees felt weak. "You can't mean that," she whispered. "I'm not part of your world." He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "You stepped into it the moment you opened your door." Noah tugged at her hand. "Mom, who are these people?" Emily forced a small smile. "Friends," she lied softly, though the word felt wrong. Marco turned to one of his men and gave a short command in Italian. The man nodded and walked toward the car, returning with a small velvet box. Marco held it out to her. "For you," he said. She hesitated before taking it. Inside, a gold locket shimmered in the afternoon sun, delicate and expensive. She looked up at him, confused. "I can't accept this." He shook his head. "You already have." The air was still for a moment. Then Marco gestured slightly and all 200 men straightened in unison. They turned, got back into their cars, and within minutes the street that had been filled with black vehicles and armed men was empty again. The silence that followed felt unreal. Only Marco remained standing on her porch, his expression softer now. "I know this is not your world," he said quietly, "but sometimes fate chooses strange moments to cross paths. You saved me, Emily, I won't forget that." She looked at him, torn between fear and something she couldn't quite name. "What happens now?" she asked. He glanced toward Noah, then back to her. "Now you live your life. No one will touch you. No one will even dare look at you the wrong way." She wanted to believe him. "And you?" she asked softly. "What happens to you?" He smiled faintly. "I have a few debts to repay." He turned toward his car, pausing before stepping in. "If anyone ever comes to your door again asking questions, tell them you're under my protection. That will be enough." When the last car disappeared down the street, Emily stood there for a long time, staring at the empty road. The silence was heavy, but in that silence she could still hear the echo of his words, the quiet authority in his voice, and the surreal image of 200 men bowing before her home. She didn't understand it fully. Maybe she never would, but deep down, she knew her life had just changed forever. And as she looked down at the locket in her hand, she realized something else. Whatever Marco had brought into her world, danger or not, gratitude or not, she would never be the same woman she'd been before that stormy night. The world had taken notice of her now, and there was no going back. In the days that followed, life on Willow Lane would never be the same again. For most of the neighborhood, the memory of 200 suited men lining the street became a whispered legend. People avoided her eyes at the grocery store. Some crossed the street when she passed, afraid of being seen with her. Others stared in awe, whispering, "That's her, the woman they bowed to." Emily tried to ignore it all, focusing on work, on Noah, on keeping things normal. But there was no going back to ordinary. Every shadow made her heart skip. Every black car that passed made her tense. Still, she noticed something strange. The fear she once carried at night began to fade. The same men who terrified her now protected her from afar. She'd spot a dark sedan parked down the block, its engine idling quietly, and when she glanced again, it was gone. The house felt safer, the nights quieter. No more break-ins on her street, no more petty crimes in the area. It was as if her small house had become sacred ground, and even danger itself refused to cross it. One afternoon, as she picked Noah up from school, a police cruiser pulled up beside her. Officer Grant, a kind man who'd often checked in on her since her husband's death, leaned out the window. "Emily," he said softly, "is everything all right at your place?" She blinked, confused. "Yes." "Why?" He hesitated before replying. "Because the department's been told, well, unofficially." To stay away from your street. Orders from somewhere higher up. He lowered his voice. You wouldn't happen to know why, would you? Her hands tightened on Noah's backpack. She forced a small smile. No, officer. I don't know anything about that. He studied her face as if searching for a lie, then nodded slowly. Be careful, Emily, he said before driving off. That night she sat by the window, staring out at the quiet street. She wondered if Marco had done this, had pulled invisible strings to shield her. A part of her wanted to be angry, to resent the way her life had been rewritten without permission, but another part of her, one she barely understood, felt safe. For the first time in years, she didn't lock her doors 3 times before bed. A week later, there was a soft knock on her door. She froze, every nerve alert. It was late, nearly midnight. She opened it just a crack, and there he was. Marco. Dressed in a long black coat, his presence as calm and commanding as ever. The rain misted behind him, the same way it had the night they met. Marco, she breathed, a mix of relief and fear in her voice. You shouldn't be here. He gave a faint smile. I had to see you. She stepped aside without thinking, letting him in. He moved slowly, his limp barely visible now. You look better, she said softly. He nodded. Thanks to you. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small velvet box, setting it on the table. I wanted to give you something. Emily frowned, shaking her head. You've already done enough. You turned my life upside down. He chuckled quietly. I suppose I did. He pushed the box toward her. Inside was a delicate gold locket engraved with her name, Emily Grace Carter. She turned it over in her palm, feeling its weight. What is this? Protection, he said simply. Every man in my family knows that symbol. Anyone who sees it will know not to touch you or your son. Ever. She stared at him, her throat tight. I don't want your world, Marco. I don't want fear and loyalty and secrets. I just want peace. He looked at her, and for the first time she saw something different in his eyes. Sadness. You already have peace, he said. You just didn't know how fragile it was until now. She looked away, her fingers tracing the locket. Why me? She asked quietly. You must have 1,000 people who would die for you. Why show up here again? He hesitated before answering. Because you reminded me that not everyone lives by blood and revenge. You saw a dying man and didn't see what he'd done. You saw what he needed. No one's done that for me in a long time. There was silence for a moment, filled only by the sound of rain tapping against the windows. Noah's footsteps padded softly down the stairs. Mom? He mumbled sleepily. Then he spotted Marco and froze. You're back. Marco crouched down slightly, meeting the boy's gaze. I am? And you're still keeping her safe, I hope? Noah smiled shyly. I try. Marco nodded approvingly. Good. Keep doing that. Emily felt her chest tighten. You should go, she said gently. People talk. If they see you here? He straightened, nodding slowly. You're right. He turned toward the door, then paused, looking back at her. If you ever need me, he said, for anything, day or night, wear the locket. That's all it takes. Then he was gone. The rain swallowed him as his car disappeared down the street, leaving her standing in the doorway, clutching the little gold locket to her chest. Weeks turned to months. Life began to find a rhythm again, though it was a new kind of normal. She worked her shifts, helped Noah with homework, tended her small garden. But every now and then, she'd catch a glimpse of a black car at the corner of her street, headlights dim, engine running. Watching. Protecting. Once a man tried to break into a house 2 doors down. The next morning he was gone, vanished without a trace. Police said he must have fled the city. Emily knew better. She never asked questions, never said a word. One evening she opened the locket for the first time. Inside was a small folded note. Her heart skipped as she read the words. "You reminded me what mercy feels like." She closed her eyes, a small smile touching her lips. Marco's world was far from hers, built on power and fear. Yet somehow for one fleeting moment their lives had crossed in a way that changed them both. And though she never saw him again, she knew he was out there, somewhere in the city's shadows ruling his empire, carrying the memory of the woman who had once saved his life. Sometimes when she stood by the window at night, she swore she could hear the faint sound of engines in the distance. A quiet reminder that even in a world built on blood, compassion had found a place to breathe. And as she tucked the locket under her shirt, she whispered into the silence, "You're welcome, Marco." The streetlights flickered softly outside, and for the first time since that stormy night, Emily felt something she hadn't felt in years. Peace, strange and unexplainable, yet utterly real.